Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Live, Laugh, What? I'm Liv, and today we are talking about the Enneagram types of the characters from one of the biggest movies on Amazon Prime. Apparently, it's highly rewatched by you. If you're loving it, it is My Fault London. And this is one I really want to do a quick disclaimer before we even jump into some of the complexities of this. Number one, this movie has a lot more sexual content than I would normally be comfortable with. I feel like as a believer, we are called to not grieve our spirits. But in this context, this is a movie that you can easily watch without seeing any of that. It's very clear when it's coming up. The plot is not ruined because of this. And it's something that I watched it with my mom. Like, you skip past it. And I loved the plot with like the racing. And I think there's a lot there that's worth a watch without the sexual content. So my advice to you, as with anything, we need to guard our spirits. And if it's not going to be doing that, skip past it. That's what I always say. So have the remote handy while you're watching this. That is my disclaimer before we start. I certainly don't want to suggest anything that would be a stumbling block. And this is something that I thought about it and I'm like, at the end of the day, you can easily skip past these things. It's not like, an HBO series where you have no idea it's coming and it's smacked in your face and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, no. So just want to do that quick disclaimer because I do care about you and I want to make sure that we're promoting things on here that are going to be good. Now, with that out of the way, I really want to talk about why I'm so intrigued with this movie and particularly typing these characters. So for me, I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, we have got to go into the subtypes. Like, the subtypes are everything with this movie. And that's where I feel like, for me, looking at these characters, it was like, well, they could be this, but they could be that. And again, it came down to subtype. I knew that they were probably this type, but it was like, they're not your typical. So we had to dive deeper. And again, through and through, I am a tri-type girly. I love talking about tri-types, and that's kind of the main thing I talk about on here in terms of typing these characters. We talk about the core type, the wing, and then I typically will give them a tri-type just because I feel like that gives you the full view of a character. And again, it helps you get more familiar with using that even for your own life, typing yourself, friends, family, whatever. But this time we have to dive into the subtypes, and that's going to be the crux of the matter here, and just kind of comparing the subtypes versus like the standard of what we see with this type. That gives you a little clue right there into why this is so important. If you know, you know. Okay, we are just talking about the two main characters in this as well. I'm pulling up my notes here, but we are talking about Noah and Nick because the whole movie really revolves around them. I don't think we need to like be in the weeds. So it's going to be a pretty quick episode, but buckle your seatbelts. No pun intended. That's hilarious that worked out. But y'all, I love a racing movie. We're gonna be doing Fast and Furious soon, and I'm so freaking excited. Okay, so My Fault London, I want to talk about Noah first. So Noah was an interesting one, and again, I mentioned that I had watched this with my mom, and it was so funny because she had brought up, is Noah a counterphobic six? And I was like, wait a second, I hadn't even considered that for her because I felt like I'm listening to the words that she says, and I have some quotes I will directly quote for you. But, she's like, it seems like there's this sort of counterphobic energy. I hate to use that word, but you know what I mean, to her that seems like this kind of moving towards the fear instead of moving away. And, the more that I looked at it with that in mind, I'm like, no, I see where you're going, but I don't think that's exactly what's happening here. So I typed Noah as a sexual subtype 4. And, some of the things that really grabbed at my attention were in the opening scene. Right away, I was like, oh, got to be. I will be shocked if she does not end up being a 4 by the end of this thing. So she would say things like, I thought happiness was for other people, not for me. I never believed in happy endings. She says that she blamed herself for things that weren't her fault. And then she also says at the end of the movie, which is kind of like a going back to the opening of the movie, that broken ones have the power to heal each other. This is so 4. And the thing I want to talk about is typically with the 4, I think you're going to be thinking more about the, I'll say, more theatrical, more romantic. Remember, the 4 is sometimes called the romantic individualist, but they're more often referred to as the individualist. And so for her, I felt like she didn't have that like romantic kind of like whimsical, theatrical like essence. I felt like she had more of an edge. For her, I think she really has this hardened exterior, almost like this armor she's had to acquire over the years because of her past. And again, this movie deals with some pretty heavy topics like abuse and just parental neglect, really. And it's very, very sad. But the thing that I think is so fascinating, and this is something again, like it's nature versus nurture. Yes, you're born with your personality type. Like, if we go back to what the word says, God handcrafted you in your mother's womb. The end. Like that is the truth, right? But a lot of times, just like I talked about this in the white collar episode, sometimes you have things that are innately in you, but they can be used for bad or good. And so I think it all comes down to the nurturing part where is it going to go, good or bad? And so for Noah, I think she's doing fairly well considering. Like, let's just take that right off the bat. Like, she could be doing a lot worse. And I feel like I don't know if she like did therapy or what. It's not really talked about in the movie. And I know this is based on a book, so if there's any book lovers out there that know the book, let me know because I think that would be really telling. But from what we can see in the movie, there's no mention of therapy. It's just like she's kind of had to just like pick herself up by her bootstraps and get on with life, which maybe someone could sit there and be like, well, is she a Sunny 4? Which is Sunny 4, if you don't know what that is the counter type 4, and that's the self-preservation 4. And so they actually seem totally opposite of a 4 in some ways. Like a lot of times people think that they're a 7 or a 1, or I think sometimes even a 2, but 7 and 1 are like the more common ones. So it's interesting, like, she seems as if she's kind of come up with this "it is what it is" attitude, but she still, like, has to let you know that she's pissed off. And it's so interesting to tie that into what my mom was saying about, like, is she a counterphobic 6? The difference between the 4 and the six's core motivation is fear. They are constantly thinking about that and more in relation to rebelling against authority, whereas what we see with Noah, she kind of rebels more against a peer. She's more like her world really is focused on peer to peer versus, child to parent or student to teacher, like that kind of a thing. And so the interesting thing with this is some of the things with the sexual 4 and with the counterphobic 6, which is also the sexual subtype 6. So, and not every counter type is a sexual one. Like I just said, the counter type of the 4 is a self-preservation 4. So it depends on every type. But the interesting thing here is we can see a lot of similar ways that they like act out, for lack of a better word, but the motivation is completely different. And I think that's something that I really try and drive home in these episodes. Someone can look like a certain type on the surface, but unless you know the motivation behind why they're doing that, you can't really understand what type they are. And that's why it's so important to let someone, figure their type out on their own before you go throwing things out at them, because sometimes that can throw them off the path and they're like, oh, yeah, like I should answer this question that way because they said that I'm kind of this, that, and the other. So, another little reminder there. But let's get into some other things that I jotted down about Noah. So, she is abrasive. She pushes back. She also like holds on to her opinions. Even after she's been proven wrong, she kind of is like trying to kind of get some more digs in there because I think part of her, like she wants to open up, but I think again, remember the 4 deals with kind of this root of like shame and fear of rejection and things like that. And so I think for her, she was so rejected by her father. She was completely just like hung out to dry by the one person that should have been the protector. And so I think in a lot of ways, she sees this peer who is a male who she's like attracted to, but she almost doesn't want to believe it because there is that fear of rejection. There's the fear of being judged. There's a fear of all of that. And so what we see, which is so interesting because in your mind, you're probably going, wouldn't you want to almost do like what the type 1 does, which is like you almost try and hyper be perfect when you're in this state? You try and like be so perfect and so put together and so what the other person wants to avoid rejection. What she does is so interesting and very type 4 of she actually comes out even harder and like just comes out swinging. And she's like, I will dress like this for a black tie event. She's like, because I'm not changing. Like I am me. This is real, this is me, was what she came out the gate with. And, I mean, some people could be like, well, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point because it's like you're not giving people like a chance to really like you because you're being so abrasive and combative. And some people could be like, oh, is she an eight? Because that is kind of the blustering thing that eights do. And now, we love eights here. I'm just saying. But she has more of an emotional undercurrent that the eight doesn't have. And, but spoiler alert, there is an eight in this movie, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for Noah, I think she has a lot of emotional charge under the surface, but I think she seems like oddly mature. I don't know what's going on. Like there's just so much there that I wish I had more context. And I know that the next two movies are already in production. So it's going to have to be one of those things where we come back to this down the road and say, okay, are we still on board with these types now that we have more information? So let me know if you want to see that in the next, I don't know, I think year it's coming out. So let me know. But the interesting thing is we see Noah start to kind of peel away that armor that she had put up from her past circumstances. And I think she's kind of fascinated by Nick, but she's also kind of thinking to herself before she knows his full story, like this kid's had it so easy. And I think that's something that, remember, fours, they do deal, especially in lower health levels, with envy. And so there's a little bit of this like I've had such a rough time and they seem to just skate by, and then they think they can come at me and judge me. That's hilarious. Like, I'm going to judge you first type of a vibe from her. And again, I think that's why it was quick for me to be like, she's not an eight. I think she probably has an eight in her tri type. But remember, fours and eights, in certain circumstances and in certain health levels, it's quite easy to get them mixed up, especially in a pop culture setting. Some other things about Noah. I loved this quote. This was so funny. This is when they are in the car after the gala. And she says, I was judging you based on information I acquired. That cracked me up because I think a lot of it, though, like she thinks she's gathering information and coming to a conclusion, but we see she really didn't, right? Like she was really going just based off of how this person and their actions were making her feel. And she was kind of just judging what was on the surface. She didn't know the backstory with his mom and her alcoholism. She didn't know um these situations he puts himself in simply because of like pain he's been dealing with. And so I think it's so funny that she's coming from the angle of like, well, I'm judging based off of facts. And it's like, no, you're not. You did not have any of the facts with which to judge him. And I think that's also a good reminder for us to be like, hold off before you judge somebody. There's probably a reason they're doing X, Y, and Z, and it's not clocking to you, but it is to them. And I think we just need to have more grace. So that was a good reminder. One of the other things that I thought was so interesting was as emotionally charged as type fours are, because remember, they are in the heart triad. The twos, threes, and fours are in the heart triad. She cut Dan off like nothing. Like, she was like, you suck, you cheated. He's obviously an absolute dirtbag. And she's like, I'm done. Didn't care. And she had obviously been with him for a while. There was a deep connection. Like, he even says that they're best friends and all that. And she just like had no qualms. She's like, bye. Again, I think she does have an eight in her tri type, but the interesting thing for her is because, and this goes back to really why she is a four, because of the rejection that she dealt with so early on that shaped a lot of her worldviews and how she approaches relationships. She sees this as a direct hit, direct rejection, and she's like, bump it, I'm done. And this is something that I think a lot of times other types would maybe be a little bit more forgiving of the situation and try and excuse it away for the sake of saving a relationship they care so much about and a person that they feel is integral to their life. But for her, there's so much of this, not so much nature, but nurture that has shaped her and how she approaches situations, that I think she's very much like, all right, I'm done. Like, this is how it is. Fine. Be that way. And she's very comfortable being herself. And that's something that I love about fours. Like, you could have the most whimsical, theatrical, dramatic four on the planet, and like, they're them. And I love that because I'm like, you're so comfortable being you. I'm obsessed with that. And that's something that a lot of other types really wish they had, right? Like, we can all think back to a time where we're like, oh my gosh, like, I wish that I was more me and not so afraid of what someone thought. And so, that is something that I do value about her and I think is so cool about her character. And even when Nick is kind of trying to like push her buttons and like move the relationship along, I think she does a really good job. Like, it's flirty, but it's not too flirty. Like, she's still kind of like, eh. And that like gets under his skin more, which I think is kind of funny. And I think she almost finds like joy in the humor of it. So that's what I just thought was too funny. But the last thing about her, she has got guts. The fact that she got in the car to race Ronnie, like that was crazy. And I think she is somebody like, again, sexual subtypes. I feel like they're the bolder of the subtypes. Self preservation, again, I mean, the name kind of speaks for itself. A lot of people hear sexual subtype and they're like, what is that? Like, what is going on? And it's not sexual in the way that you think. They also are referred to as a one-to-one subtype, and that's typically what I refer to them as, but I don't know. I just have been saying sexual for this one. I don't know. I'm afraid this episode's gonna get like freaking dinged for explicit content now. I feel like anytime you have a one-to-one, they're gonna be more kind of, I'll say, in your face, for lack of a better word. Like, they like to have more of a one-on-one connection versus a social subtype likes more of a group connection. They sacrifice for the group. They put the group above themselves, like that kind of a thing. Self-preservation, obviously. They're kind of more like put the mask on yourself before you put it on others. And each subtype has its amazing benefits, and each subtype also has its downfalls. It's life. So this is something where I think I'll start saying one-to-one from now on so we don't get creeped out. A one-to-one subtype 4 is so unique and interesting, and this is one that does typically get mistyped for an 8. And there's a reason why. It's because that one-to-one subtype, like I said, is bold, is powerful, is daring. And that's something that when you kind of partner that with the things that are already going on with the 4, it's so fascinating, right? Because it just amplifies everything that we see. And especially in this movie with Noah, it takes on almost this life of its own. And that's why I said this is such an interesting film for me to be doing this on, because again, I think some people could be like, she almost like wants to hyper run towards fearful situations and like crazy things in order to quench it. But if you look deep down, that's really not what's going on. That's something that we do see with Tris from Divergent. That's one of the ones I talk about all the time. That is a classic counterphobic 6. But someone like Noah, there is a lot more emotional underlay. And I think also she does come across so 8ish and kind of nonchalant about things. And this is why it's so important to look at the subtype and go, okay, they look like this on the surface, but what's really going on? And peeling back the layers and saying, like, okay, I think this is actually the core that they're coming from. And so, again, this is why I was so excited to do this with you, because there is some 8 going on, there is some counterphobic 6 going on. But at the end of the day, definitely a one-to-one subtype 4. Okay, that was so much on Noah. I'm like, I can't even believe I talked that long about it. But we have to move on to Nick now. Mr. Nick, he is a self-preservation 8. And I chose this for him because there's so many things, but I'll tell you a few of the things that I jotted down when I was watching. He's very straightforward. Love that. Love that for him. He is really not fazed at all by other people. Like, even in the situations where his windshield's getting bashed in, when Ronnie's just coming for him left, right, and center, he does like keep his cool. It's crazy. He really does keep his cool throughout this whole thing. And that's something that I think most types, honestly, would have been out of there. They would have been losing their minds. And so that's something, again, I think you can look at a type in an entire situation in film or television and say, okay, they were in X circumstance, Y circumstance, and Z circumstance, and this is how they reacted in all of those. And typically that is going to be your dead giveaway. And again, for him, like, the 8 is powerful. They know what they're doing. I think a lot of times in childhood, they tended to take on responsibility that wasn't theirs. They were almost like an adult in a child's body. And so, again, I think they almost come off more mature and more just experienced at handling things than most other types would for their age. And so that's something, again, that I think is also kind of a dead giveaway when someone's an 8. When Noah starts to push and pry, that's when you see him kind of start to crack. And that is something that 8s, if they feel like they are going to get exposed, that's when you will see them cut you the frick off. It's not like a blow up situation where they're going to be like explosive behavior, but you're going to see a definitive like shut door. And that's something that, again, we see in that scene where they're driving back from the gala and she starts to poke and pry about his mom and dad, and he's like, get out. And what I love, and this again just solidifies him being an 8, he didn't just throw her out on the side of the road with like nothing. He called the valet and was like, hey, go pick her up. It was like, I need you to get away from me, but he's not going to just leave you with nothing. Like, he's going to take care of you. And again, I've talked about this all the time because I feel like this need to defend eights because they just get such a bad rap. For what reason? I'll never know. Like, you're crazy. But the thing about eights is they so take care of the people around them. Like, if you have an eight in your life, you are blessed because they take people under their wing. They want to make sure that the people around them are cared for, provided for, and protected. And, all the girls are like screaming, crying, falling down because, yes, love that. But, this is something that, again, it's like there was a boundary drawn of like, I'm not going to let you treat me like that. The end. So you need to get out, you need to fix yourself, but he's still going to make sure that she's safe, if that makes sense. The other thing, the valet says, and this is like right after that scene, that there's no party without Nick. And the funny thing is, and this is again very much like Hallmark type 8, it's not because like what you would see with a type 7 where they are the life of the party. Like they are out there, number one on the dance floor, like they're a vibe and they are setting the tone, right? Like they could carry the whole party on their back and they do. This isn't the same way with Nick. When an 8 walks in, it's more like like, oh, okay, like this is the place to be. And I think sometimes people would almost say that's a type 3 thing, but the 8 just has it. I don't know how to describe it. It's really hard unless you've like been around it, but the 8 just has it. They just do their thing. It's just this essence and demeanor that they have that when they arrive somewhere, it's like, it's on. Okay, here we go. And so that's what I thought was so funny. It's like he brings this shift in the atmosphere to a function that is noticeable. And that's something that, again, that's just the 8. It's hard to explain, but if you know, you know. The other thing is, like, he really does care about Noah, even though she's initially so mean to him. I do not understand, but he always makes sure that she is okay. And he stands up for her even when she's just been like such a hag to him. And so that's something that, again, like, there's this deeper need to protect and make sure his inner circle, whether or not she wants to be in the inner circle, is safe and protected. And that's again something you'll see with 8s. Like I touched on previously, he's not explosively reactive. Like he's very, very dialed back. And that's something where I was kind of like going back for a minute, like, is he a 5? What is going on? But remember, 8 has a connection to 5. 8 has a connection to type 2 and type 5. Remember, the place that you go in disintegration, which is like lower health levels, does not mean that that's the only time you pull on that type. So it's so funny because I I think a lot of times we see 8s that have this very like 5-ish quality. And what like kind of bring it down to is that it's probably a wing versus like maybe going so much to 5. But I think for Nick, he probably has a 9 wing, but he also does some very 7-ish things. I feel like he was just like oscillating back and forth between 7 and 9, but let me know your thoughts because I really, especially if you've read the book, like I need to know, does he have a 9 wing or a 7 wing? I feel like he was constantly just like back and forth, which is what we should be doing anyways, because you need both of your wings to fly. But the other thing was that he's attentive and aware of others. Like when Noah was having a panic attack, I think other people would just think that she's like, oh no, like what's going on? But he was very aware of like, no, this is a panic attack, right? He just picks up very quickly on someone else's demeanor and vibe. And that's something, again, like those gut types, because remember 8, 9, and 1, they're all in the gut type. And I mean, the gut triad. And so they very much like can just pick it up intuitively. And that's something that, that comes in handy in situations, trust me. But yeah, he's just really good at that. And that again solidified him being in the gut triad versus the head triad, because remember, 5, 6, and 7 are all in the head triad. But he didn't have enough of like the head triad characteristics for me to be like, well, he's probably a 5. No. A couple of the other things, he has to blow off steam and like get away from the situation and go off by himself. And I think that's something that we see from 8s. They need to retreat from whatever is upsetting. And a lot of times, though, you will see 8s not really want to sit in their emotions at all. They just go off and do something. They just like get away from it. They distract themselves. And again, that's something that I think we see more like in terms of they talk about it, but we don't necessarily see it in the movie. We see conversations about it, but we don't necessarily see the actions. So, like his mom was saying, he would fight, he races, he does this stuff to kind of distract him. He wants this high velocity, high charge activity to take his mind off things. And that's something that you'll definitely see from an 8. Like they will do kind of these wild, crazy adrenaline rush things in order to disassociate from the emotional turmoil. It's like the adrenaline rush gives them like a relief. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And then the last thing that was really interesting, and again, I feel like we have to talk about this. He has taken on things without like bringing other people into it. When there's trouble, when there's chaos, he handles it himself. And again, very classic type 8. Like I said, I think a lot of times in childhood, they took on a lot more than they were supposed to. And they were just like mini adults, and they felt like, I will handle it on my own. I'm not going to be betrayed. I am not going to have other people invade my space. And I know that if I handle it, it'll be done right. And that's the other thing. They want it to be handled the way they want it to be handled, and that's that. It's a blessing and a curse in a way, right? Because the blessing is they think about others and they're like, I am not going to involve them. The curse is that they take on more than they probably should. And a lot of times we see 8s experiencing burnout, and it's because they're working constantly. They're trying to acquire this like safety net. And a lot of times that will burn you out. Like 8s, you have to remember to take care of yourselves. You have to remember to take a break. There's a Sabbath for a reason. And that's something that I know it can be hard, especially in Western culture, but you have got to prioritize yourself, because you're not going to be able to be there for the ones you love and care about if you burn yourself out. You're going to be just tore down, and that is not the way you want to live. That's not going to give you the best life possible, and that's not going to be the way that you can be there and a leader and a protector and a provider for the ones that you care about. So remember that, 8s, because we love you and we care about you and we want to see you at your tip top best. Anyways, that is it for this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed. I might do a separate episode just because this was so long, because there was so much to talk about, but I might do a separate episode on why we see like 8s and 4s together, especially in these romance movies. I think it's really interesting, and I know I didn't touch as much on the relationship as I wanted to, but again, this was such a long episode. So if you want to see more of that, let me know. Be sure and DM me on Instagram at Hey It's Liv James or at Live Laugh What Podcast, and I would love to do another episode on this. Remember, 2 more movies coming out, so we have plenty of chances to touch on that. Anyways, be sure and check back next week for a brand new episode every Tuesday, and I'll see you next time.